Hello, good evening. My name is George Laird and welcome to the Laird Report. Today I'd like to continue on with the Russian-Ukraine war, and I'd first like to start off with a theme that's been emerging, which has been basically promulgated by senior politicians in the West and also recently by the former president of Lithuania. And that is the idea that Putin is crazy. Vladimir Putin is not crazy. What he's doing is wrong, but that doesn't make him crazy. He has a very logical and set agenda of goals that he wants to accomplish in the operation which his country is conducting in the Ukraine. The PR campaign to paint Putin as crazy is a line that seems, in my opinion, to be rather contrived. And I say this because I've taken the opportunity to look at several of the interviews and speeches that Putin has been doing on TV just recently. And when I look at Putin, I don't see a man that's crazy or insane or out of control. Another piece of PR nonsense which has been generated in the West is to somehow suggest that the Russian military chiefs will somehow get sick of what is happening in the Ukraine and stage a coup against Putin. Well, that isn't going to happen, and it's very much a fanciful piece of nonsense, which to me, I just don't understand why people are saying that. Yes, in warfare there is a propaganda war, but I think you have to keep propaganda within the realms of credibility. Another little interesting snippet that I happened to come across was someone who put forward the theory that an ordinary Russian soldier can be bought off and lay down their arms for 100,000 US dollars. I don't see that as viable. I just don't know why people do this. It's just, I think it's just a way of trying to soften up people in Western countries to perhaps maybe buoy up their confidence, or perhaps maybe to prepare them for the fact that in the event of nuclear war, that the West is going to retaliate with nuclear weapons against Russia. How did we get into this position? Well, there's basically three causes that caused us to be in this position. And the Russian-Ukraine war, for all the bad things that has happened in it, is in fact the fault of the West. So what were the causes that made all this transpire? Well, there's three causes that come to mind more or less immediately. The first one is the NATO expansion right up to the borders of the USSR, or as it's now known, Russia. The second cause, was of course EU expansion. And as we've seen, the EU is trying to turn itself into a super state, effectively, which some people dub as the United States of Europe. The third element, and I think to be fair, it's more a more serious issue, is what's called the Orange Revolution. The Orange Revolution, on paper, is all about democracy in countries so that they would be more like the West. But the Orange Revolution, as we've seen in other countries, isn't about democracy, it's about regime change. And that is what the West wants to pull off in Ukraine, and I think it has been successful in that fashion, more so than it has been in other countries which the US and the West has been involved in. I would like to focus on the Orange Revolution, the third cause. The Orange Revolution, as I have explained earlier, is used by the West to undermine countries which the Americans see as anti-US. They do this by funding various NGOs, non-government organisations, who then create a network across a country, and then these NGOs spread dissent. They usually do this by highlighting minority rights because that's a good way of stirring up trouble in a country by agitating amongst the civilian population. If you look at Belarus actually expelled a lot of NGOs because, according to the president of that country, they were working against the interests of the people of that country. Well, I haven't looked into that an awful lot, but it does seem to me that if you look at other instances where NGOs have been set up and worked in other countries to promote democracy, they all seem to have a similar theme and modus operandi. When I talk about the NGOs stirring up trouble, as I said, they usually do this by using minorities, and the most obvious minorities that people tend to use are in fact things like LGBT and of course religion, which promotes quite a strong reaction. You know, somebody basically has the idea of promoting victim culture, and then other people get behind them, and then from there a campaign's formed, and then effectively they point the finger and blame the government. We've had approximately 10 days of war so far, and the West is keen to put forward this idea that the Russians have made slow progress. Well, the question is why? Why have the Russians made slow progress, which the West says it has? And that's because I believe that the Russians are trying to preserve as much of the infrastructure of the Ukraine as possible. I suppose they initially thought that they were going to get a quick war, but it didn't turn out that way. So, and now we're basically into the second wave of the campaign, which shows the Russians moving forward in force and taking areas. I think that the Russian goal will eventually be to wreck the country, because that way they don't have to be, they don't have to be there to take care of the infrastructure, and also the security issues that are involved in that. So I'm not 100% sure whether the Russians will drive right up to the borders of NATO. That will depend on how the war goes from the Ukrainian perspective. At the present moment, the Russians, like I say, I suppose they've tried to take reasonable care, but eventually that approach will be dropped. Quite simply, the Russians will basically bomb and shell their way forward, because the Russians are very acutely aware, like everybody else, that when the casualties and deaths start to stack up, people then start to ask questions. So the war will become more intense, and it will become more serious, and of course it will become more prolonged. And the reason I think it will become more prolonged is because of the way that the West is now supplying weapons. The West has effectively chucked the Ukrainians under the bus, pretty much in the same way that they did with the Georgians back in 2008. So, if you had a chance to look at the Russian-Georgian conflict, you'll see that the Georgian people were basically emboldened by the people in the West, and then when the Russians reacted rather badly to what the Georgians were doing, that caused a war, and the Georgians certainly paid a price for that war. At the end of the day, Russia, I think, will possibly end up taking the whole country, and then possibly retreat back to what they would describe as a buffer zone. perhaps maybe the two states that they've recognised in the Donbass region and the other area will be incorporated into Russia directly, pretty much like Crimea. And then perhaps in the buffer zone, perhaps the Russians will try to establish a government of some description, and we'll see where we go from there. As to the Ukrainian politicians, I think that they're on very, very thin ice indeed. And the question that has to be asked is, do they wish to see their major cities effectively destroyed, taken out by Russian artillery and Russian missiles, creating a refugee crisis? And in that refugee crisis, all the people will start fleeing westwards. So is it tenable how much longer this war can go on for? I'm not 100% sure. But the Russians aren't backing down. The Russians are making progress. And the Russians are capturing cities. At the end of the day, what we should remember is that the Ukrainians can really only defend. They really cannot go on an offensive against the Russian military. And in that way, they are basically playing catch up all the time. I think it's an incredibly dangerous situation in the Ukraine. And it's absolutely incredible how many people have lost their lives because of the actions of the Ukrainian politicians and being quite simply stupid. They've been bought over by the West. They've been made promises. And now in their hour of need, the West is supplying weapons, yes. It's supplying medical supplies. But what it's not willing to do, it's not willing to put boots on the ground. And at the end of the day, if there isn't NATO boots on the ground in the Ukraine, it means that the Russians will win at some point. And then, of course, what happens after the Russians win? Will there be a new pro-Russian government sitting in Kiev? Or will the Russians split the country in two and we have a scenario like we had with East and West Germany? I don't know. That will depend on Vladimir Putin and how the Russians look at the security situation. But one thing that I do believe is that there's going to be a massive influx of refugees all heading westwards, right up to the borders of NATO countries such as Poland and Ukraine and other countries. So don't expect a quick war, expect a long war, as I mentioned in a previous video. I hope it's over quickly. I hope the Ukrainian government calls a ceasefire, goes to the table and has the brains to work out that the real solution for their country lies in neutrality, not siding with the West, not siding with the Russians. The Russians, I think, can live with the idea of a neutral Ukraine, but I don't think the Russians can live with the idea of a pro-NATO supporting Ukraine, which the Ukrainians are effectively in bed with the West. That is not going to happen. Thanks very much for your time and watching this little video. And watch out and stay tuned for more propaganda, which is going to be coming your way. I would say that you should look at the propaganda because it is of interest. But what you should really be looking at is the type of weapons that the Russians are using, because this will tell you just how committed the Russians are in this war. When they start bringing up more of the more dangerous missile systems and bring forward more of these mechanised artillery units and tank units, I think you'll see just how committed the Russians actually are. I hope, like I say, peace breaks out soon. I hope medical supplies from whoever sends them gets to the front lines as quickly as possible. And I hope that those people that are injured get the medical treatment that they need and deserve. There are no winners in war. And we're going to watch and see this on our TV screens.